Hey everybody! Welcome to the Good Evening Kitties podcast, a Tales from the Crypt review. My name is Melissa, your ghostess with the mostest, and today's episode is Season 2, Episode 17, My Brother's Keeper. This one's kind of fun, so let's go ahead and get into this one. As always, John Kassir does the voice of the Crypt Keeper, and Danny Elfman does the theme song. This episode aired July 24th, 1990. It was directed by Peter S. Seaman. This is his only director credit. The screenplay was by Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman. It stars Timothy Stack from TV's My Name is Earl, Jonathan Stark from movies like Fright Night and Mom and Dad Save the World, and Jessica Harper from movies like Suspiria and Shock Treatment. I'm going to go ahead and read the back of the box here. So here's what it says about My Brother's Keeper. They're stuck with a problem. Conjoined twins develop a rift when one of them falls in love. Ooh. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So it starts out with the Crypt Keeper. He's hanging out, talking to himself in the mirror. And it's kind of interesting in this scene here because he's looking in the mirror and then he turns back to us to talk to us. And when he turns, his reflection is shimmering in the mirror. And there's a part in his facial features where you can see his bones sticking out of the makeup in the mask. It's really kind of neat. Like you can see like part of his skull bone poked up next to his ear that's like through his skin, which is kind of cool. I don't know if that's completely accurate where that's supposed to be, but it probably is. It doesn't look quite... I don't know, it's right next to his eye. Well, yeah, I feel it. I'm feeling it on my face right now. Yeah, I think it's part of like the upper cheek bone kind of thing. So yeah, it's kind of neat that you can see that. And he's just kind of hanging out, because it's a double of him, kind of like how the episode is about Siamese twins. And so he's sitting there and he's, bringing in the episode and kind of freaking himself out because he can see his gross reflection in the mirror, and it's scared himself. So this episode is about two Siamese twin brothers. Their names are Frank and Eddie. And they are connected by a small part in the hip. And it's kind of surprising to me that they are still connected because it seems like it would be such an easy fix because it's where they're at is a pretty good place to be connected if you were to have to be attached as brothers, It's kind of like this hip section here. So they can still like wear their own clothes. They each have, their own legs, and all that stuff. So it's like, it's just two separate people hooked together, which at first I was like wondering how they did it or exactly how attached were they or were they pretending to, but it looked like some of those scenes later, it looks like they really did build like a prosthesis thing for it. That's pretty neat. So we'll go ahead and get into it. They're going out to like a bar dance club kind of thing. Frank is the really responsible one, and Eddie is a little more crazy. And Eddie really wants to get this surgery that will help get them disconnected. And he's trying to make things worse, I think, in a way for Frank, so that he'll sign these papers and get the surgery. But apparently the surgery is kind of risky, and Frank isn't really buying it. Frank is driving, and right now you can't really see that they're Siamese twins or anything like that. It basically looks like he's driving and his twin hooked onto him is smoking and drinking and getting real drunk and stuff and trying to make them crash almost by like putting his foot on the gas pedal and driving. And they slide into the parking lot at this club. And Frank is just like, will you stop being like this? Like, don't you know that no doctor can help us with our problems? And he's like, but they can. There's this surgery and you won't sign it. And he's like, well, it's really risky and I don't feel like this is a problem. And so they still go out in public and everything, which is, that's fine. But like they do get, people can't really tell at first. You think it's just two guys standing really close to each other because they're completely separate people, but this thing of flesh that's holding their hips together. So they get out of the car and that's when they both, put their feet down and you kind of start to see that something's different about their clothes, that they do have a part down by their hips that's different and you can tell they're Siamese. And they're wearing these suits and they're kind of heading in these matching suits to this place. And again, Eddie's just really upset about all this. So he's going to make things worse, And Frank is like, we're not that big of freaks. And Eddie's like, okay, well, people look at us, and we're considered freaks, so.
Really, Eddie, you'd be so much happier if you just learned to accept our condition. Accept the fact that we're freaks.
Because most people in a club like this, and it's a kind of a fancy club, don't really notice because you don't look down. You're just like, oh, these two guys are walking together. So they sit down at the bar on these stools, and one girl's on the side of Eddie, and some people are kind of to the side of Frank, and right away you can tell Eddie's definitely more interested in women in a way. Like he hits on them in this really bad way that he uses this line all the time. And so, he starts saying this line of like,
You know, under that Marion the Librarian exterior, I'm thinking there's a studded leather corset just itching to get out, am I right?
You know, it's just really creepy the way he says it, and he does it a couple times in the episode. So you're like, oh, okay, well, that's Eddie's thing. And he likes to drink a lot and just get crazy. And so Frank's over there, and he brings this book out at the bar, and he's sitting there reading this book. And the woman next to him, who's a little more, who's kind of nice and reserved, she's reading a book as well. And she's like, I thought I was the only, crazy person to read a book here at the bar. And he's like, oh no, I'm reading, he's reading this book by Andre Malraux, Man's Hope. And she just happens to be reading Man's Fate by the same guy. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. And so they really hit it off. Her name's Marie. And then Eddie notices it. And right away, he tries the line on her. So he goes, under that Marion Librarian exterior, I'm thinking there's a studded leather corset just itching to get out, am I right? And right away, Frank's just like, Eddie, come on. And she looks completely disgusted. She's like, really? So he's like, come on, man. We're having a nice conversation. Why are you being like that? So him and Marie start talking, and she realizes, it's his brother and stuff, but she still doesn't know that they're connected. Eventually, this song comes on, and he asks her to dance, and so Eddie also found a woman to dance with. So the two women follow them out onto the dance floor. And at first, Marie couldn't figure out why, if Eddie was so bad, why Frank always was hanging out with him. Because Frank was always like, oh, I love, the opera, but Frank will never go. And she's like, well, then, why would you have to take your brother then? And just kind of thing. And Frank's just like, oh, well, I told him we'd go to this club here. And then if I go 3 times, he'll go to the opera, and she's still kind of confused. So Eddie drags him out on the dance floor. And Marie says, sure, I'd love to dance. They both go out there and they're doing these just silly dances. And the girls haven't still kind of figured it out that they're connected because they're standing really close to each other. But she is kind of suspicious. Marie kind of goes in, they're kind of dancing, and she goes in to turn into him, and she ends up running into where they're connected. And her and the other girl kind of see that they're connected. They're Siamese twins, and they're like, oh, okay. And the other girl's like, she just takes off. She's like, that's messed up. And so everyone in the club kind of starts to see that the girls are freaking out, and they look down and they notice too. So everyone in the club sort of kind of notices, that they're Siamese twins, and they're all kind of staring at them, and so then Marie gets kind of upset too, and she says, it's late, I need to go. Eddie turns to Frank and he's like, still think we're not freaks? So they leave, and I guess it's the next day or so, and they head to the doctor, and it's kind of neat because they put they got this x-ray up of the two of them. So you can see they kind of, one has a little more of a spine curvature and the other one, and then they're connected by this large piece of tissue. And really when you get to kind of look at it, it's a little more dangerous of a surgery because of how they're connected. And this doctor's really kind of weird. He's really excited to see this formation because I guess if he can successfully do it, he's going to be super famous.
Not often does one come across a classic Pago-Pagi formation. Twins joined at the bottom.
Yeah, we know how we're attached. The question is, can we be separated?
They're just kind of asking questions. Frank's really concerned about it. It should be a easy surgery because they both have their own organs. But the doctor's there's only a 50-50 chance that it was be successful in a surgical separation. And so I was like, oh, well, that's not super great. Because apparently there's so many arteries and a lot of blood supply in that section so they could bleed out if something were to happen. Because they only share one single bloodstream, which I guess that's a thing. I don't know. So they'd have to reroute all their arteries and veins. So then Frank's like, no, I don't want to do that. And Eddie's like, come on, because they're probably pushing 35, 40, they've been together a long time. I mean, they live together, they do everything together. And, the 50-50, he just can't do it. And so they go to sign, and Frank just can't do it. So Eddie takes the piece of paper, and he's like, okay, fine. So they head back home. And Eddie's upset. And I like this part because, everything in their house is cool, dual stuff set up for two people to do it side by side, which is kind of cool. They sleep in the same bed. They both have these silly pajamas on that have cars on them, and they're both brushing their teeth together at double sinks. And then, and they're talking about the surgery, and, Eddie's like, are you thinking about the surgery? They have their own monogram towels. And so a lot of it, though, you find out a lot of the things that, because Eddie's a little more wild, a lot of the things that Eddie does makes Frank feel the effects because of how they're connected. And so Eddie's like, oh, I'm going to take some Ambien or, a sleep aid. And he's like, man, I really hope you wouldn't. Because Frank's like, I want to read. He won't read because he'll fall asleep too. And so basically Eddie's up in the ante so that he can really annoy Frank. So Frank will sign these papers. They even go to the bathroom next, they're peeing in front of dual toilets, side by side. I mean, everything's just like a synchronized thing that they have to do together. And the best part I liked is they work on a dual exercise bike. So like they both have, it's like one bench hooked with two sets with two wheels, and they're both like doing their exercise in their pajamas, you know, talking about the operation, and everything, like I said, is just set up dually. There's two of everything. And so Eddie's just telling him all the different cool things you could do, you know, that Frank could go to a cooking school he always wanted to go to in Paris. He could roll over when he sleeps, you know, he could get his own bed. And really what it comes down to, one reason Frank admits that he won't do it is because he's afraid he'll be lonely. He's been so used to being with someone, even if it is Eddie, someone that he has to keep bailing out of situations and standing up for. But basically what he's saying is he just thinks he'll be lonely, you know. And the best is, like, as they're talking, anytime Frank, like, kind of starts to consider it, Eddie just brings out the document. Like, he has it underneath, like, a cloche on the table, and he just, like, opens up, like, all you gotta do is sign it. Like, he just keeps, like, popping up the paper, like, I'm just gonna carry it around till you change your mind, you know, and he's just, like, bugging him with it. This part's kind of gross, because you get to see where they're connected. Because when he tells him that, you know, Eddie's upset, and he's like,
You signed that release. I'm giving you the operation right here. Sign it.
Eddie, I'm afraid.
Afraid of what? It'll work when we separated forever.
Well, maybe that's what I'm afraid of. Maybe I'm afraid that once we're separated forever, that I would be lonely.
and they pull the pants to the side and you can see it, and they kind of like zoom in on it, and you can see it really is kind of this prosthetic thing that they have on there. It really does look kind of thick, like it's all stretched and veiny, and they kind of show like their butt cheeks from the backside, and it's like it looks pretty gnarly. They're definitely connected pretty tight. So I'd imagine it kind of hurts, like if you go to pull away from people, you know, each other. And this thing is pretty gross. Like it's like all pulsing and stuff a little bit because they're moving. And then Marie calls him on the phone, kind of interrupts the argument. So Frank starts talking to Marie. And Marie kind of has, you know, wants to apologize for what happened the night before or the other night. And, you know, she kind of wanted to see him again. She still was kind of charmed by him, you know, even though they are Siamese twins, she's kind of okay with it. And so Frank invites her over for dinner with him and Eddie. And this part's funny. Frank turns to Eddie like, what are you doing this week on Friday? And he's like, I'm doing whatever you are, right? And so it's been like 3 days or so. So this was like on a Tuesday or something, Monday or Tuesday. So by Friday, Eddie's really wanting to make this horrible for him. So Frank is in the mirror at the bathroom getting all ready, you know, he's got a tux on, and he's trimming up his nose hairs and all things like that. And Eddie is still like in his pajamas. He hasn't shaved in a few days. He's barely showered, if anything. He just won't take care of himself at all. So it's been like a week or so. Yeah, he won't take care of himself because he wants to look all gross. But Frank's not going to let it stop him. And so he wants to go to the symphony with Marie. And so Eddie's like, okay. And he still like has a nice pair of pants on, but he's got like a dirty suit coat, and I think he's been drinking, and he's just chewing gum and being obnoxious. And Frank and Marie look really nice together. They're all dressed up nice and just kind of ignoring Eddie and dragging him around. And people are kind of looking and being like, okay, and just Eddie's just hitting on women with the same phrase and everything. So they go to the symphony, and so after the symphony, they come home for dinner, and he's made her some food and stuff. And they're kind of toasting and having a nice dinner and talking, and again, ignoring Eddie. And Eddie's next to them just pounding alcohol, and so just like drinking and like saying rude comments and stuff like that, and just like whatever. And he's like just being real messy about it. And the problem is, the more he drinks, Frank kind of starts to feel it. Marie's like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, just try not to be drunk. But Eddie keeps pounding everything. So they're talking. And Eddie's kind of like making fun of him and stuff. And Marie's kind of standing up for him. Like, you know, I happen to like your brother. I like his company. And Eddie's just being gross and embarrassing. And so Marie's kind of like, you know, it's getting kind of late. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to get going. So they go to take her to the door, you know, because he's got to come. So he's like dragging Eddie, and they get to the door, and they're gonna like kind of kiss goodnight. And so Eddie's like making comments around the side of the door, and Frank like pushes him away. And they do like a cute little like kiss, you know, kind of thing, like a just cute little kiss on the lips. And she's like, you know, I get it, your brother and stuff. And he's just and Frank's starting to get kind of drunk too. So he's like, yay. And so they do a little kiss, and then he tells Eddie like,
I know you tried to ruin it for me, but you didn't. I'm happy. And you know why? Because I'm in love.
Yeah, I know. You fall in love, and I get a boner.
And so it cuts to some time later, and I guess they've been dating. And, you know, I tell you, Marie is fairly open-minded when it comes to the bedroom. I will give her that. for as straight-laced as she looks, she's pretty open-minded because they are laying in bed and the bed is moving, and Frank and Marie are kind of curled up on the side, on the right side. Well, on the left side, Eddie is there with, I think might be a sex worker, but she's got this really like leathery outfit on, and she's like whipping him as she's on top of him, you know, and he's just laughing and they're having their own time. But the whole time it's getting like really raunchy over there, and they're over here just cuddling, you know, and talking. And then, you know, this has happened multiple times with Frank before because of, you know, Eddie is wild and he's telling her, just let your mind go completely blank, pretend he's not there, you know, stuff like that. And eventually it just becomes a lot for Marie. She's like, okay, this is just getting too freaky because this girl is just really like whipping all over the place and he's yelling and stuff and they're just being really crazy. And so he takes this time, which I thought was kind of weird for Frank. He takes this time to propose to her while they're in, like right now. Because, I mean, they were talking about how they're having such a great time together. But he proposes to her, and he's like, I probably should be on bended knee, but will you marry me? And it's like, it's not a good time. It really doesn't paint being married to someone who's connected to another man in a good light. And it kind of freaks her out. So she's like, I can't. I'm sorry. And so she heads to the bathroom, and the sex worker follows her. You know, she's like, I'm going to go check on her. And Frank's like, you need to stop this. Eddie's handcuffed to the bed. And so the sex worker comes up to her and is talking to her, and it's quite an outfit she got on. And apparently this is where you find out that Marie is also a sex worker. And the woman comes up to Marie and says, Eddie says you're doing a real good job.
Eddie says you're doing a real good job. You got his brother Frank right where he wants him.
No shit.
But see, you gotta turn up the heat now, baby. You gotta pump up the jam.
Pump it up, right.
Mm-hmm, pump up the jam. Because Eddie says that if you get his brother to sign some paper by tonight, girlfriend, we don't have to be hoeing these streets no more.
Well, let's get it over with.
All right.
And at first you're like, what? And basically what this is Eddie hired her to hit on him at that club so that he would fall in love and want to get the surgery. You know, once they got separated, then she would just break up with him. But I think he was paying her or something, you know. So apparently Eddie's gonna like really take care of them. Guess Eddie's saying, I don't know how they have all this money, but Eddie's saying he's gonna pay off a lot of stuff. I don't know from what or if it's even trustworthy. But Marie's just looking uncomfortable still. Even though she knows he's part of the thing, you can tell that she does have some feelings for Frank. So she's like, okay, let's get it over with. So they go back into the room. And she's like, you know, Frank, they're still laying in the bed. You're like, Frank, we need to talk. I want to believe that it won't always be like this, but what kind of future can we have with Eddie all the time? So she's basically kind of setting it up so that he'll be like, you know, I'll sign the paper. So she says goodbye. And Frank just looks devastated, and he's just like, really? You know, and Eddie's just like, yeah. And so he's trying to run to go get her, but Eddie's attached to the bed by the handcuff. And this part's kind of funny because he's like, give me the key, Eddie. And Eddie's like, I don't know, what key? Where did I put it? And he's like, finally it's like in his mouth, and he like spits it out, and Frank gets it, but he's too late to catch up with her. And so now Frank's really mad. And him and Eddie are out there in their boxers and like robes and fighting in the kitchen. And it's a pretty nice apartment, really. And they're fighting and they're wrestling. He's punching Eddie in the face. They're, you know, one's bleeding from the nose, one's bleeding from the mouth. And then he's like, just sign the form, you know? And Frank's like, sign the form, fine. I'll sign the stupid form. And again, like there was another time too where Eddie just brings it out in the bathroom and puts it up on the wall. Like, you should sign it. And now he has it in his pocket during that whole sex scene. He's just like, it's in my pocket. And he pulls it out now on the table, like, sign the paper. And Frank's like, fine, I will sign it. And they're getting ready to sign it when he gets like a knock at the door. You know, Marie comes back in through the door and she's basically saying, don't sign that release, Frank. And then Eddie's like, shut up. Basically, she starts telling him what happened, that it was all a setup. Eddie hired her to convince it. And he's like, you mean you didn't love me? And she's like, well, I grew to love you, and I do love you now. I wasn't supposed to, but I've fallen for you, and I'm sorry that this happened, and I'm sorry we're tricking you, and I don't know if you can forgive me, but I'd still like to marry you, even if you are attached to him. You know, she's like, I do love you. Unfortunately, while this is happening, Eddie is slowly grabbing a meat cleaver, and he looks very upset. And so this part's a little sad, because Frank goes to hug Marie, and he's happy, and he immediately forgives her, but as he's doing, he's hugging her, and this part's kind of sad because all of a sudden he takes that cleaver, Eddie does, and, you know, they're hugging, and he slams it right into Marie's back, like right into her spine. And it's sad because at the time, as soon as it happens, Frank kind of says something like, oh, Marie, are you okay? I felt you stiffen. And it's like, oh, like, he's like, am I rushing stuff? Am I worrying you? You know, and she's stiffened because she got hit in the back. She got hit in the back pretty bad, and they really like close in on it. And like her dress, it's part in her blue dress she's wearing is exposed in the back, and it's right through that. So it's like right through the skin. You can see all of it with the axe, and it's pretty gross. And Frank's freaking out, and he's holding her, and he's yelling at Eddie. And Frank says he's gonna call the police, and Eddie's like, "Well, I'll do it for you." And so he basically calls and admits to killing her. He's like, "Here's my full name. I killed this woman. Sure, I'll hold." I guess they ask him to hold. Because basically what he's saying is if they do sentence him to the gas chamber, they won't be able to carry it out because they'll be killing him too. So it's like even if they kill him, they kill Frank. So he's like, it'll keep me out of jail or at least keep you off, because we're connected. Which I'm sure there are some rules for that kind of stuff. Frank's just losing it. And the cops are on their way now. And so now Frank is like, you know what? I'm not going to let this happen. I don't care if you go to jail or not or whatever happens, but I don't want to be connected to you anymore. I'm sick of sticking up for you. I'm sick of all this stuff. And he just starts slamming pills and alcohol. Eddie's like, what are you doing? You're going to kill us. Or taking too many pills, Come on, man. You're taking too many pills. And he's just chugging it. And as he's taking it, like, I don't know what kind of pills he's taking, but something's strong because he's taking a lot. It's kicking him pretty fast. And so Eddie's starting to get kind of sleepy. He's like, stop it. I told you not to take the pills. But yeah, Frank's just sick of dealing with him ever since he was a kid, making excuses for Eddie. And so the pills start to kick in. He also takes Eddie's hand and handcuffs him to this bar on the counter in the kitchen. So now they can't go anywhere. They're basically just going to die there. Because he's like, I don't want to live attached to you anymore, to a murderer. And so Eddie's starting to pass out faster than Frank. And so during this part, Frank's like, you know what? I'm going to sign that paper even if we end up dying just to spite you. We're going to die and I'm going to sign that paper just to spite you because you have all this stuff. And he takes, it's like a old-fashioned like ink pen, and he grabs some of the blood coming off of Marie on the floor and signs with the blood. Signs his name. And there's some like blood on the release for the surgery and all kind of stuff. I'm like, okay. And then he passes out. So then they wake up in a hospital. And Eddie's like all cross-eyed. And they wake up in the hospital and they're laying next to each other, and Frank's reading a book, and he's like, oh, my head hurts, and where are we? And they're in the hospital, and you can tell like something's up. But they're laying in bed next to each other. There's a nurse checking her vitals. They didn't end up dying, even though they took all those pills. And Eddie's just kind of like, typical Frank, you try to kill me and all you give me is a hell of a hangover kind of thing, kind of this way he says. And so he's already like hitting on the nurse taking his vitals. It's like, you just woke up. He like smacks her on the butt. Like, come on, man. He's just bad. And so the nurse is like, oh, well, I guess you guys are well enough for visitors. And they open up the curtain and there's some police standing there. And they say that Eddie's under arrest for the murder of Marie Hilton. And Eddie just starts laughing because he's like, well, as you can see, I'm connected to my brother, so... He does admit to killing her, but he's like, there's, only so much you can do. And Frank's being very quiet right now and just, like, reading a book. And so you can automatically kind of tell what's happening here. And so Frank's like, no, we're not freaks anymore, Eddie. We're free. And he's like, what are you talking about? And that's when they pull the beds apart. And you can see that they're two twin beds, and they've been separated. And right away, Eddie's just freaking out. He's just like...
We're not freaks, Eddie. We're free. Or at least, I am.
Hey, you're over there!
Oh, did I forget to mention? I signed Dr. Schnellkraut's release form. He did a pretty good job, don't you think?
No! Don't let him take me away from you, Frank! They're gonna put me in a
Oh, what's come over you, big brother? You're acting like a goddamn pussy.
You're gonna put me in the gamer!
And he's like, bye, Eddie. Except for now that Frank has had that happen, Frank's kind of... He's gone now. He's almost just as bad as Eddie now. I think he's kind of lost it. What I also find interesting is, would they still do the surgery if they were under the influence of booze and pills and they found the... Like, why would they still go along with the surgery? Unless, like, Frank came out of it before and was like, go ahead with it. I don't know. I mean, thinking too much into it, but I'm just saying, like, usually you go into surgery, they don't want certain stuff on your stomach, and you're usually conscious when you go into it, even if you did sign a release form, I don't know. But somehow they end up just doing the surgery anyway. They got the, wrappings and stuff, and they handcuff him, Eddie, to the bed, and that's it. They're taking him away. And he is having a huge fit about that. But yeah, Frank is completely mean now. And now, another, like, nurse comes in to check on him, and Frank he has pretty much switched to being kind of like Eddie. because he's just going to live crazy now that he's free because he doesn't have Marie and he's insane. And so that nurse comes back to check on him, and he already hits on her with that same leather-studded corset gag. And I was like, oh man, I was kind of hoping he wouldn't be like a jerk, but I guess everything just messed with him after all this stuff. So yeah, that's how it ends. It ends with them getting separated, and Eddie is going to prison for the murder of Marie. But I thought that was a pretty interesting episode. You know, it's definitely kind of a different take a little bit on it. I mean, it's kind of similar to what you would think with Siamese twins. There's always usually something that they don't agree with in different things I've seen in horror. But it was kind of interesting the way it's set up and just like how they were separate people and then like, you know, like all this stuff. So, but yeah, it was an interesting episode. It's fun. So then it cuts to the Crypt Keeper. You know, he's hanging out in his crypt. Crypt Keeper, you're so punny. And the best Crypt Keeper pun is...
Frank Shaw picked a deadly time to sever all thighs with his brother.
Yeah, sever all thighs with his brother. Ha ha ha. There's no trivia on IMDb for this one. Next episode is going to be season 2, episode 18, The Secret. That ends up wrapping up season 2, so that will be the end of season 2. Shortly after that, we'll go into season 3. The Secret, it's a fun one. You know, so again, thank you for listening to the Good Evening Kitties podcast. If you want to like, rate, review, subscribe, check it out on all the places where you find podcasts. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes if you want to support the show. That's awesome. It's an easy thing to do. It lets me know that you guys are listening, and that can kind of, put me up on the charts and stuff. I really appreciate it. There's also a Facebook page for the Good Evening Kitties podcast if you want to like that. I also now have a Patreon page up if you wanted to monetarily support the show. Eventually down the road, I'm going to have different tiers and start adding some different episodes and things for Patreon supporters only. For right now, there's just 2 tiers, $1 one, and then for $2 you can get a shout out on the episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening. Bye.
I just had quite a scare. I actually thought my heart was beating again.
Movies are bombing all over the country. They are posing as movies you already know. They may be in your theaters, your neighbor's home, or even your own.
Why are you doing that voice?
I don't know. I thought it made me sound cool.
It doesn't.
I'm Jason Bishop, host of the Invasion of the Remake podcast, with co-hosts Sam Stepanenko and Trish Coughlin. Join us each week as we rotate talking about your favorite films and their not-so-favorite remakes.
We'll also dig deep to find forgotten films that we think are more worthy of remaking, complete with our own fantasy casting.
You can get all 130 episodes and counting on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Radio Player FM, and all the best podcast providers, even
Frickin' YouTube.
For the low, low price of absolutely nothing. Join the invasion. Subscribe today.
Or we'll blow up your planet.